So this happened about 5 years ago, while I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at the mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters one Saturday night in a very safe city with very low crime rate. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late, and the mall stores were starting to close. I took my kids to the connected Applebee's for a late dinner. We finished up eating about 10 p.m. and leave out the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys when a 50-ish-year-old crusty-looking guy starts walking up from somewhere in the parking lot with shaggy gray hair and a faded flannel shirt and old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and he said, "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him and shakily said, "What?" He then said he was just kidding and came and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car waiting for me to unlock the car to let them in. He starts to make small talk with me and my girls. He's asking things like if we were being good for Santa, how old they were, if we got all our Christmas shopping done, what kind of things did we get. He didn't seem drunk, high, slow, or mentally challenged at all. He was very coherent and seemed sound of mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman, alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, who was being approached by a stranger who came and stood right next to my kids, on the other side of the car just shooting the breeze, talking to me and my kids, with his hands in his pockets and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant while trying to disguise my frantic hands digging inside my giant purse for my car keys. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was slightly panicking and trying to be polite to keep the situation from escalating. I felt like at any moment he could pull a knife or gun, rob me, and my kids were right next to him, away from their mother on the other side of the car, and I couldn't find my fucking car keys to get my kids into the car safely. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see my oldest daughter was a little weirded out. She kept glancing at me to gauge my assessment and reaction to the situation. Kids often tend to not recognize potential danger when they are with their parents, since they see us as their protectors. And being that he was only talking and acting friendly, I was doing my best to stay calm. They were oblivious to the alarming situation that we were all in, and being 9 months pregnant, and that I was no match for a grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon on him. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried politely to give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "It was nice chatting with you, I gotta get these kids to bed, and it was nice meeting you, and tell my girls to say it was nice meeting him too." My polite attempts to get this guy to leave wasn't working because he kept sidestepping my attempts and asking them what their favorite subjects in school was and how nice young ladies they were. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to how not okay the situation was because he was being friendly and because the whole time she was with her mommy, so I'm safe, child mentality. So she started to talk about what she picked out for Daddy for Christmas, talking about kid stuff and asking if he knew what Minecraft was, and keeping this creep from leaving us by keeping him engaged in conversation. They didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them the hell out of there. Then, I suddenly felt the sinking feeling of dread when I realized I may have lost my keys in the mall and that we were stuck outside with a strange man who kept looking over his shoulder and was showing no signs of walking away. I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing that it would make me do whatever he wanted as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline spike, and my heart and stomach were doing flip-flops, and I felt like at any moment shit was gonna go down, as the gravity of realizing that there's no other people or witnesses around, and that we were totally alone with him at that moment. Odds were stacked against us, and that he has his chance. Then, he was all of a sudden like, "Okay, it was nice talking with you. See you later," and walked off in the same direction as to which he came from. It wasn't until then I found the car keys and unlocked my car. I told my kids to get in fast, and I got in too and locked the doors, started the car, and drove the hell out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and laughed. I was overwhelmed with relief, and then I was confused over what just happened. I thought to myself, why the hell would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it is totally acceptable to go out of his way and just approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot late at night just to chit-chat? But being that nothing happened, I brushed it off and joked about it too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked how shopping went. I said it went well, and my 15-year-old told him what happened in the parking lot and how weird it was, and was kind of just joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm, and I started making fun of myself, telling my husband how I was attempting to inconspicuously rummage through my purse to find my keys. My husband went completely white, and I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm and assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy just talked and eventually left on his own. Now, my father-in-law is a retired sheriff deputy, and my husband went through police academy training after graduating high school. He decided to go to business school instead of becoming a cop, and being that the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop as a dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him the details. What my husband told me completely rattled me to the bone. My husband told me that he was 100% sure that the reason why the guy was hanging around us and chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock my car. And the reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with my kids and hold a knife or gun to them to gain leverage on me to force me to cooperate, knowing that I wouldn't abandon my kids, which would force me to get in the car and then do whatever he wanted me to, which most likely would be to drive to a remote location to do God knows what. And being that he wasn't wearing a mask suggests that his intentions were to also leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the back passenger door where my 7-year-old was standing, waiting to get in. My husband then told me the most likely reason why the guy ended up leaving was because it took me so long to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. The whole time I was desperate to find my car keys, which through some sort of divine intervention stayed hidden in my purse, thus saving us from potentially being abducted. Where I live, it was about 11 p.m. when this happened. I live in an apartment complex where all of the apartment entrances are outside, not in an indoor hallway. My living room couch is about 20 feet away from the front door. I was laying down on my couch doing some studying when I hear the front door knob turn. It's super squeaky. The knob jiggles a few times. I thought it was my roommate, so I yelled towards the door to hold on so I could put my German Shepherd up so she wouldn't jump all over my roommate. I put the dog in my bedroom and then I went to the front door. I looked through the peephole, no one was there. I called my roommate, who I haven't seen in a couple months, which is because she was staying with her family out of state because of the pandemic. She said she's still out of state, so it wasn't her. My sister is across the country on vacation, so it wasn't her either. I called the night management to my apartment, and they said that they'll call security to have them come out just to scope things out, but security didn't answer their phone. The past few weeks, I felt like someone has been watching me. My car was broken into, and they took everything, camping and photography gear, and my violin. Yes, I was stupid for leaving it in my car. There's also a bunch of people who sit out on their balconies and do nothing but stare. So it could be anyone, seeing that I live alone because my roommate is gone. I also have an assigned parking spot so they know which car I drive. Not as creepy as some other stories on the subreddit, but it definitely spooked me out for a few months. When I was back in high school, I arrived at school earlier than most of the students and the staff. This particular day was rainy and the school was empty. I was walking down the main hallway towards the cafeteria. No one was around when suddenly a boy I only mildly recognized came from the nearby hall. This boy always sort of gave me the creeps, so I tried walking on the opposite side of the hall from him, but he walked straight towards me, smiling. That smile, it gave me chills. I knew if I could just get past him, I would be in the cafeteria where there would be other students, and I would be in the clear. He stopped a foot in front of me, way too close for comfort, and said hello. He could have reached out and touched me, but he didn't. I said hello and tried sidestepping him. He stepped in front of me again. We did this a couple times. I would try to step in one direction and he would block my path, and he was aware that I was trying to get past him. I glanced towards the balcony, then risked looking over my shoulder. No one was in sight. His words chilled me. No one is coming to save you. My brain went into panic mode and I froze up. What did I need saving from? What was he gonna do? He stepped towards me and I couldn't move. Finally, I hear a door close behind me, steps down the hall as an administrator was walking towards us. As quickly as it started, it was over. I walked towards the adult, towards safety, and I was free. I did report him, but nothing ever came of it. Since he didn't touch me, the report acted more as a log in case he did something similar in the future. It happened 8 years ago, during the summer. A little backstory there. I was at my mom's house, but she barely lived there anymore. She spent most of her time at her boyfriend's, and my sister was very often left alone. I was a student in another city, but I had came back to the house during the holidays. I was 19 and my sister was 16 at the time. Our house had 2 floors. The living room and the kitchen were on the first floor, then 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second floor. The kitchen and living room had glass window doors that opened on a large terrace. From the terrace, you could go into the backyard by some stairs. We didn't really use that ground floor, as it was pretty dark due to the small windows, and it was basically a garage and an office to do our homework. Like I said, it was summer, very hot. I had just discovered Game of Thrones, and I had 2 seasons to watch. Every morning, I took my laptop, made myself comfortable on the terrace near the kitchen, and would watch an episode, or 10. My garden was surrounded by a U-shaped building, so you could see the terrace and my garden very well from the balconies. Some men were working there for a couple days now, and they were working there late, so I could often see them while I was watching the series in the evening. They were minding their own business, and so did I, so I didn't think much of it. One morning, I was sleeping in late, and my sister woke me up whispering, "Wake up, there's a man in the house." I was half naked because of the heat of the summer. I stood up, perfectly awake now, grabbed a shirt and went downstairs, practically running. I know this is a dumb thing to do, half naked, helpless young woman, but I am very protective over my little sister, and I didn't feel any fear to this point. I went to the kitchen, couldn't find a sharp knife, so I took a fork. Absurd, I know. I asked her where she saw him. She told me she was watching TV in the living room, and because the windows were open, she saw a man in the reflection standing just behind her. She jumped off the couch, finding herself in front of him. A tall man in his late 30s. She had no chance in a fight. The guy had one of his feet on the first step to the second floor, where I was sleeping. She shouted, "Who are you?" He just walked quietly back in the kitchen, where the door to the window was wide open, and took the stairs to the garden. As soon as I heard that, I ran into the backyard with my helpless weapon. I ran to the gate in the front of our garden, and went in the street looking for him. I'm sure if I found him, I would have not been so brave anymore, and would have probably peed myself. Suddenly, I realized my sister was still alone in the house, and maybe that fucker was there too. I went back into the kitchen, searched in the house, but thank God we were alone. This is when I saw my computer was missing. My sister told me that the guy didn't have anything in his hands when he left. That was the scariest part, because it meant either he was in the house for quite some time before, took the laptop and came back to do whatever the fuck he planned to do, or there was another person in there. I put some decent clothes on and took my sister to the police station nearby. I'm very angry with the policemen. She was a minor. She told them everything and described the guy with a lot of detail. They asked her, "Did you recognize him?" And she said yes, without a doubt. They said, "You know it's highly unlikely that we'll find him. You should be thankful that you and your sister hadn't been raped." Like she needed to be more frightened than she already was. They wrote up a report, and she was too shaken up, but couldn't recognize the man, even though she said the contrary multiple times. We never heard back from the police. We came back into the house. She was very scared, and I was very angry with the loss of my very expensive laptop. I needed it for school and had tons of photos on it, and I was also angry at the attitude of the police officer. We both sat down on the terrace and talked about what happened and how lucky we were that she had saw the man before he came upstairs. This is when I noticed the working men weren't working there anymore. From the streets, no one can ever know we have a backyard and another entry into the house. My sister told me that he was acting like he knew the house a bit. Maybe it was his first time and we didn't notice. I'm certain one of the men working on the neighbor's balcony, who has been watching me, was the person that broke in that morning. From that day on, we double locked our doors and slept in the same bedroom for weeks. I was 9 or 10 when this happened. My parents had just picked me up from softball practice and I was pretty tired. Before getting home, my parents stopped at the grocery store to shop for dinner. Since I was tired, I asked to stay in the car and take a nap. They agreed and let me, since they would be fast. I quickly drifted off to sleep, laying in the back seat of our little car. At some point, I wake up, kinda groggily, but with a tingling sensation. A chill ran down my spine. At first I couldn't figure out why, because I was still half asleep and a little out of it. I sat up and just started to look around, but didn't find anything. Then I heard a tapping noise. There was no one around, but the tapping continued. In my half-awake state, I realized that the tapping sound was coming from behind me through the closed car window. I turned my head to see a creepy woman staring at me intensely. She was a methed out, high homeless lady. She was grinning at me with her yellow-brown, rotting teeth. The few she had left anyway. Her translucent, pale, yellowish skin was warped, stretched out, and burned in some places as if she passed out in the sun for too long. Her arms were very skinny and veiny, bruised and probably infected from the puncture marks running up and down both of her arms. Her skin looked a little bit green, and there was pus that was oozing out. Her nails were discolored, long, jagged, and broken. Dirty blonde hair was all over the place, badly cut and greasy. The most unnerving part though was that she was heavily pregnant, never mind that she was also barefoot and also had white clothes on with dried vomit in the front, and obviously had pissed herself on more than one occasion. Her outfit looking back kinda reminded me of a cult-like uniform. Anyway, this woman freaked me out. Like, where did she come from? What did she want with me? And who knows how long she had been there, watching me sleep. I wish I would have done something like honk the car horn or started screaming. But the thing was, I was too scared. I couldn't do anything. Thank God the doors were locked because she tried to open all the doors. I don't know what she was thinking or planning to do, but it was certainly unnerving. She got frustrated and pounded on the windows, making animal-like grunts, signaling her frustration at being unable to get into the car. Thank God, by some miracle, she eventually gave up and just wandered off. I told my parents what happened as soon as they came back. The lady was gone at this point. My parents got upset at me about what happened and just made me go shopping with them next time. Safe to say, years after, I've never ran into this woman again, and I hope to keep it that way. It was Christmas time. My wife and I were staying at our childhood home, where her mother now lived, all alone. Well, not if you include her cats. The house was on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs. If you're picturing freshly mowed yards, American flags, and empty sidewalks, you're picturing it right. It was a single-story home that was attached to a garage out front. The garage had 2 doorways, apart from the electric garage door, of course. One that leads to the garden and backyard. This one had an old doggy door from the days with dear old Max that they covered with a piece of nailed wood. That had always made me slightly uncomfortable before, but I figured it had been that way for years, so what's the worst that could happen? The second door led into the kitchen. It could stop a mouse, but not much else. Definitely not something that wanted in, or someone. We were asleep in my wife's childhood bedroom at the front of the house. It was 3 a.m. I was in that deep, dark recess of sleep. Then I heard it, the scream. "What are you doing?" It was my mother-in-law's voice echoing down the hallway. To me, lost in the sea of sleep, it sounded like a jet engine roaring past my eardrum. I bolted up. What happened next happened in a matter of seconds. But about that scream, even though I was dead asleep, I heard enough of it to sense the urgency behind it. It wasn't a, "oh you scared me" type scream. This was different, and I knew it. I watch and read a fair amount of true crime, and this scream awakened that horrible fear, that one that says, this can't be really happening to me, can it? Honestly, in that second of the night, it sounded like someone was being murdered. You ever wonder if you're a fight or flight type of individual? I always have, and I came to know something about myself this night. I'm a fighter. I leaped out of bed, growled in the manliest voice I could muster. "I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker." I tore the bedroom door open and ran down the hallway. There, at the end, I saw my mother-in-law, nightgown on, a look of utter shock in her face, standing still. We make eye contact as I continue towards her. She turns her head and looks directly into the kitchen. I hurry past her and round the corner into the kitchen. The hollow core door is obliterated, shards everywhere. I look through the open frame to see the electric garage door is open. I push ahead. As I run into the garage, I hear it, the sound of someone hopping into a car just out of view. Just as I make it to the driveway, I see the car peeling out from the sidewalk adjacent to the house. But the adrenaline is still pumping, and who am I to say no to adrenaline? So like an idiot, I run barefoot after the car. But I'm no Michael Johnson, and even he couldn't have caught that speeding car. It soon vanishes down the street, and I'm left alone. The police showed up within 3 minutes, which, I have to say, makes me feel a lot more at ease with my mother-in-law living there now. They took our statements. My mother-in-law said that she heard noises, the hollow core door leading to the house being kicked in, and she walked into the kitchen where she encountered the burglar, a small-framed woman. The police theorized she was working as part of a team. Her job was to squeeze the doggy door, kick in the hollow core, and open the electric garage door for her accomplices. According to the police, the burglars most likely thought no one was home. Fortunately, my mother-in-law must have caught her off guard and scared her, in addition to my manly growl, of course. But it feels good to know everyone was safe, and to learn that I guess I've got a little fight in me. And for the record, we bought the heaviest goddamn wooden door you've ever seen to replace the hollow core. I would like to see a mouse try to get through that. We moved into a new house right after my 10th birthday. I'm the second oldest of 7, but at the time there was only 6 of us. When we moved in, my younger brother was incredibly scared of our basement. Every night before he went to bed, he would lock the basement door and the back door that's in the kitchen, right next to each other. We were always making fun of him, like siblings do. After a couple years, I learned why. My next door neighbor ran a daycare. Our bus would stop about 4 blocks from my house, and we would walk with the daycare kids, and had to leave by 7:15. My dad had to be at work at 7 a.m., so he'd wake us up before he left. Our oldest sister stayed at a friend's house, so this particular morning, my brother Buddy and I were the only ones in the house. We got around and went to the kitchen to make our lunches for school. In the middle of making our lunch, we heard a knock. We both went to the back door and were thinking some kids were trying to scare us. We looked at the door windows and no one was there. After a minute, we went back to making our lunches. A couple minutes later, we heard a knock again. At this point, we felt uneasy. We both went to the back door and still no one was there. This time, we decided to wait. Suddenly, we heard it again. We realized it wasn't the back door, it was the basement door. We both turned to our right, looking directly at the basement door, when it started shaking. Someone was trying to open that door, and when they couldn't, they started pounding on it very aggressively. We screamed and ran to our mother's room. We woke up my mom and she comes downstairs angrily for waking her up. We waited at the top of the stairs for her to check out the basement. She went down there for a few minutes and called us down. There was nothing and no one. There was no other way out. The only door was the basement door from the kitchen. Since the door was locked, we knew if it was a person, they would have been stuck down there. After that morning, we started making our lunches before going to bed and avoided the basement altogether. About a year later, my brother had a friend over and it happened again. I wasn't there to tell you that story, but now, 13 years later, it hasn't happened again. And yes, my family still lives in the house. This encounter is a little mild, but still creeped me out nonetheless. This happened to me around 11 or 12 years ago, when I was about 13 or 14. It was a weekend, and I had just finished babysitting for my aunt. My cell phone rang, and on the line was a man who sounded to be about in his mid-30s or early 40s. Right away, he called me by my name. "Is this?" I said yes, and he keeps on going on and on about how he's known me for a very long time, and he's an old friend and wanted to catch up. This guy was obviously looking for someone else with the same name, so I kindly let him know that he had got the wrong number. He responded with, No, you just don't remember me. I'm telling you, we were friends and we could catch up." I was young and it wasn't my nature to just hang up on someone, so it went on for about 20 minutes. Eventually I said bye, and he promised to call back later. A few hours later he did call. My aunt answered and asked to know his name. She relayed it to me. It was not a name I recognized. She hung up and I thought it was weird, but it was over. Maybe a year or so later, the man called me back. Once again he insisted that he knew me and called me by my name and asked to catch up. This time I was surrounded by friends and confidently told him to stop calling me. I never heard from him again. It still gives me shivers when I think about it.
This happened way back in late 1989 or early 1990. At the time, I lived in Santa Fe, Texas, and drove my then boyfriend back and forth to work in Alvin, along Business 35 at Avenue I and Steel Road. It was getting close to sunset, and as evening is my favorite time of day, I had parked facing the west between a low-roof building and some kind of structure, something like a radio tower with a blinking red light at the top. While drinking my usual coffee, I noticed some movement in the distance. I thought it might be some herons and became more interested since I like watching large birds fly. The closer they got, however, the less they looked like birds of any kind. As I watched them come into view, it turned out that what I was looking at wasn't anything living, at least not how we think of things that have flesh and blood. These were just balls. 5 chrome balls, about 3 or 4 feet in diameter, perfectly round, flying in a V formation. They were gliding silently and steadily along. No variation in space or speed in any direction, just staying the course, roughly 50 feet above the ground. As they got above the truck I was driving, I sat on the door's window opening and watched as they flew past and right in line with the road behind me. It was so amazing and confusing, I had to resist the almost overwhelming urge to start the truck and follow them to wherever they were going. My eyes never left them except to blink. The entire time watching was spent trying to identify what the hell they were. It's never far from my mind for long, and it drives me crazy sometimes. I have never heard of anything similar. Has anyone experienced anything like that? Anyone in the area that may have seen the same thing? It was around rush hour, so I wouldn't think there were many people looking up at the sky. I never thought I'd have anything to post on this subreddit, but here I go. This literally just happened, so I'll try to keep this as short and organized as possible, but I apologize if it's neither of those two things. I'm a 29-year-old female, and my partner is a 23-year-old female. We're back in her hometown visiting her family for about a week. It's a very small, isolated town in the middle of nowhere, and basically in the middle of the woods. While we're here, she wanted to meet up with an old high school friend who still lives in the area. We'll call him Kyle. So, we meet Kyle at the beach, and right away, he's acting super weird, making jokes about having a three-way with us, and just making a bunch of unwelcome, overly sexual, gross comments. Obviously, we're unfortunately used to this stuff to a certain extent, but coming from someone who was supposed to be our good friend, it was extra annoying. So, me and my girlfriend are shooting each other panicked looks the whole time. Once he's out of earshot for a second, she says that she's sorry, that he's never been like this before, and we can make an excuse to leave. When he comes back, we tell him we want to get dinner at a local bar, but he just asks to join us. We felt awkward, so we end up saying yes. He says he doesn't know quite how to get there, so he follows us. We get there, order drinks and food, and then head out to the patio with the drinks. He makes a few more gross comments, but is generally being way more cool and normal than he was at the beach. We're smoking weed on the patio and chilling. The food comes quick, and we finish it quicker. Now here's where it gets really messed up. So halfway through my first drink, I'm feeling really tired, which makes sense as we've had a long day. I give my girlfriend the signal that I want to go. She makes up an excuse that we need to go. He keeps trying to get us to come to his house. I've got good weed and dabs there, and you can meet my cats, blah blah blah. He's being really pushy. We keep saying no and making excuses. We need to check up on our grandpa, etc. So finally, we get in the car and say goodnight. We've parked next to each other and walk up and into the cars together while saying our goodbyes. When we get in the car, my girlfriend informs me that she wants to stay at the bar, but fake it like we're leaving because she doesn't want to chill with them anymore, understandably. So we're sitting in the car waiting for him to leave first, and when he signals for us to roll down the window, we do. He says his GPS is being funny and asks if we can lead him to a main road. To be fair, we are in the middle of nowhere, so this didn't seem too outlandish. So, obviously, staying behind at the bar was out. So in the car, we're talking about how pushy he was being, and she admitted she feels weird driving right back to her grandpa's house, so we should drive into town until we lose him. He's behind us for a long time, even way after he should have gotten off on his exit. We think it's weird, but we weren't sure what to do. So, finally, we get on a 2-lane road, and he pulls up next to us, and he's waving a phone, which is clearly my girlfriend's phone, in the window. We pull over. He gives her the phone back, chats for just a few seconds, and then leaves in a hurry. Here's the part that makes my skin crawl. We know she had her phone. I saw her put it in her fanny pack, which was on the table, along with my phone and her weed, a few minutes before we left the bar, as we were preparing to leave. She didn't take it back out. There's literally no way she could have left it at the bar. More importantly, he got in his car and left the bar at the same time as us, meaning he had to have already had the phone when we were leaving. It's not like we left the bar first and he saw it left on the table or something. He literally had to have been walking to the cars with us and calmly saying goodnight with the phone already in his possession. Now the kicker. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend had tasted a very weird bitter taste in her straw at the bar and was already suspicious, especially with the way he'd been acting. This is why she wanted to stay back at the bar, to get away from him and stay in public where she felt it was safer. So when he walked up to the car to return her cell phone, she very casually and deliberately flashed the knife that she kept for protection in her jacket. I didn't know at the time that she had done this, so that's why it left so quickly. Obviously, I was annoyed with her for not telling me her suspicions sooner, but she just didn't want me to panic. I'm really shaken up. A few things are clear. 1, he stole my girlfriend's phone, and it seems like he did so that we'd be forced to pull over on a dark road in the middle of nowhere. 2, he quickly ended the conversation and left when my girlfriend flashed her knife. They've been good friends for almost 10 years. If he wasn't planning on doing something malicious, I feel like he would have acted confused about the knife, or said something like, "What the fuck? Why would you flash a knife at me? What is this, a bad movie?" or something like that. But instead, he just booked it, which tells me he knew exactly what she was doing, reacting to a threat and preparing to protect herself and me. 3. He probably spiked our drinks. My girlfriend noticed a weird taste in her straw right away and chose not to finish her drink. I finished half of mine and felt very tired. A few more things. I just don't know how he managed to nab the phone without us knowing or noticing. It doesn't really make sense, but he did. Me and my girlfriend both remember her putting her phone in the fanny pack perfectly. We also have no idea how he could have spiked our drinks, unless he was working with the bartender, but we were the ones who suggested that bar. I don't know exactly how he did it, but I think I know why. And for that reason, my girlfriend's now ex-friend, who made creepy sexual comments, probably tried to drug us, and stole her phone in order to get us alone on a dark road. Let's not meet again. This happened in Arizona, of course, about 7 years ago, while we were on our biannual fishing trip to Black River, out in the Fort Apache Indian Reservation. Each year, we'd take this little dirt road, only accessible via 4x4 vehicles, all the way until it ended. The only people we ever saw out there were cattle ranchers that never really went past the tree line, which was about a half-hour drive from where we camped. Needless to say, we were always way out in the boonies. There was one way in and one way out, and we camped at the very end of this road. This trip in specific was our 5th year going to the same spot, and twice a year, this would be about our 11th week-long trip at that spot. Never saw another soul outside of our party of 5, all 10 other times. We'd get up super early, sometimes a little before the sun, to get everything ready to go and fish all day, wanting to get as much fishing in as possible before it got dark. This experience happened on day 3 of 8. We were up eating some breakfast, instant oatmeal packets and protein bars for anyone curious, and getting our gear ready to go for the day. The sun wasn't up quite yet. We still had lanterns and headlamps on to see. With all of us right there, we hear footsteps coming from the road. We all look up and see 2 middle-aged Native American men walking down the road. They had no gear with them, both looking straight forward and not even acknowledging our existence. They walked straight past us up the trail along the river. We were spooked because we'd never seen anyone there and the many times we'd been. We figured they may have been camping a bit further up the road. We went down the same path a bit later, and about an hour in, we hear rustling from the other side of the river. Then, we see a fawn burst out of the trees and start running downstream. A few seconds later, 2 very mangy coyotes come sprinting out of the same spot chasing the deer down. They eventually cross back into the woods and disappear from view. Over the next 5 days, we never saw the 2 guys again. If they had had gear, I wouldn't be suspicious of this. However, to avoid us on the way back, they would have had to go extremely out of their way to get back to that road, and it really wouldn't be feasible. On top of that, the coyotes did chase that fawn back downstream where the road was. I've always wanted to share this story. I've decided to use an old throwaway account since I usually just lurk. I have no real way of proving my credibility, but if you've ever visited or live in a rural part of South Asia, you can probably vouch for me in saying that it's a lot more plausible than one might assume. My mom was born and raised in the UK, but she is of South Asian descent, and since I'm mixed, she tries really hard to make sure I'm in touch with my culture. This meant that, as a child, we would make a lot of frequent visits back home. Every summer I can remember was spent there, and then it suddenly just stopped after this incident. My mom's family back home live in an extremely rural part of the country. There's a lot of poverty surrounding our family home, so we rarely left our relatively nice part of the village. I was never allowed out to explore, and coming from the concrete jungle that is London, I was always so curious. I was 8 at the time. One of my uncles from a neighboring village would often visit with his children, and when they did, my mom would let me go with them to a small hut-like shop that sold sweets and snacks, like 15 minutes away from the family home. My cousins were 11 and 19 and both male, and it was broad daylight. To get to the shop, we walked through a small do-it-yourself road, and on both sides is what I would call the jungle. It was basically just a lot of trees and bushes as far as you could see. You can't really see anything beyond the trees. It's just a lot of greenery. I'm mixed with East Asian. I definitely get my looks from my dad's side. So being an obvious foreigner in a rural part of back home meant that I was pretty used to strangers staring and asking me questions. I was also used to creepy men that would tell me I was beautiful because I had pale skin. My mom warned me about these men and made sure I knew to stay away from them. So, the road to the hut was paved with creepy people making creepy comments, and my cousins basically telling them to leave me alone, in less than pleasant terms. There was also a group of young guys. Some of them had motorbikes, and some were just chilling. One of them waved at me. He seemed friendly enough, so I just waved back and went about my day. Once we got to the hut, we immediately started losing our self-control with the snacks. The owner was super friendly, and he let us try a bunch of the sweet mishtis he had, and he also had coffee ice cream for the first time. I distinctly remember being really excited because my mom and aunts loved coffee ice cream, so I thought it would be a nice surprise for them. I asked for 3, and the nice guy gave me 4, so my hands were full and they were quickly melting, and he told me to run, to go home quickly. I told my cousins I would get a running start, and once they finished, they could catch up. I would still be in their line of sight, plus it was daytime and it was a busy road. I start running back. There were a few older aunties that stood at the top of the road, and something about their presence gave me a sense of security. I felt a lot safer knowing they were there, and paired with the fact that my cousins were able to see me clearly, I felt comfortable enough to just walk back leisurely, minding my business and eating my ice cream. I passed back by the group of guys, and the one that waved at me came over. He said,
"You're X's niece, right?"
X being my uncle. And he jokingly took one of my ice creams and said,
"She got an ice cream for Mama."
Mama means uncle in our language, and so I just assumed he was a friend of my uncle's. He asked me when I arrived and how I was liking the country. He was so friendly, and he didn't look like the stereotypical creep. When I said I was going to go home, he said,
"Why don't you let your uncle take you? You can ride on my motorbike."
I think that's when something clicked in my mind, that maybe he wasn't the friendly uncle I thought he was. That's also when I realized I was pretty much circled in and surrounded by the group of men. It's also when I realized that I could no longer see my cousins or the group of old ladies at the top of the road, which also meant they probably couldn't see me. I wish I could explain in words how helpless and afraid I was. I had all the threats in the world explained to me by my mom, in a country where I knew I was vulnerable and had to be cautious, and I still managed to find myself in a dangerous situation. Luckily, my cousins came running and shouting, and the guys ran off into the jungle. When we told my family what happened, I was basically put on house arrest, and my mom refused to let me out of her sight. I was pretty shook up about the whole situation, and so, honestly, I was kind of grateful for that. I put it down to my paranoia, but at the time, I would get overwhelming feelings of being watched. Our village is quite small, like amongst them, it's an everyone knows everyone sort of thing. My uncle is also a big community figure, and he's very well known amongst the villagers, which is why the men probably put 2 and 2 together, that I was his niece. Having foreign family over is usually a pretty big deal, and having a niece that is mixed race is also a very big deal. I'm sure the word got around. He realized that there were a group of men on motorbikes that would frequently go past our house. They stayed a decent distance from our home though, and that they weren't anyone that he knew. It's creepy to think about now, the lengths they were going to. A couple of days before we were due to fly back, I had my second, last, and worst encounter with this particular friendly uncle. It was night, and it was like every other night when we would play board games or card games in the front room. Because it was so hot, I went to my bedroom, and I was playing on my Nintendo DS. I know, what a throwback. When I saw, out of the corner of my eye, someone at the window, staring directly at me. It was him. The worst part is he had the most creepy, sick and twisted smile I've ever seen. He put a finger to his lips, but I did the literal opposite and started screaming hysterically. I had been on edge since the ice cream incident, so what might seem like an overreaction was just my natural response. I can't really tell you what happened next because no one has ever told me. My uncle and his friends are not known to be the friendliest people, but I was told he was dealt with and he would never bother me again. We recently received a wedding film from one of my cousin's weddings, and part of the film was her leaving to get to the venue, and I noticed that the jungle was no longer there. It had basically been cut down. For the first time, I could see beyond the greenery. That's when my mom explained to me that my uncle had it cut down not long after that particular visit because of what they called the head cutters. My entire life, I've wondered what would happen to me if I'd got on that motorbike, but now I know with reasonable certainty what his intentions were. During that time, a gang had been kidnapping beggar children. It took a while for the village to realize because it's not unusual for beggar children to go missing. When we were there, people were vaguely aware that it was becoming a trend. A couple of months later, a head was found. It became known in our village, but people tried to keep it quiet to avoid getting a bad name. The problem went away once a lot of the greenery was cut down, so there was nowhere left to hide. But it's also when they realized the magnitude of what had happened. The weird thing is, I've known about the head cutters for a while. I knew it was something that had occurred in our village, but for some reason, until recently, I never put two and two together. But now that I have, I often think about what nearly happened to me. But more importantly, what happened to a handful of children in our little village. I think about the fact that, beyond our relatively small circle, no one thinks about them, and no one is haunted by their deaths. So, creepy uncle with the motorbike, let's not meet again. And I hope no one has the misfortune of meeting you ever again. This was a recollection shared to me by my paternal aunt. This happened when she was a little girl. In the past, it wasn't uncommon for some Navajo families to be very large, 8 to 10 siblings on average. Being the youngest, she recalls that it was her and her older siblings' duty to herd the sheep to their summer camp in the mountains. The kids were sent on foot with the flock and sheepdogs. Many households had single cab trucks if they were lucky, so it would be unfair for the parents to take some kids and not the others. So only the parents rode in the vehicle and would await the kids at camp, hauling water and packing summer clothes and essentials such as imperishable food items. The majority of the RAS didn't have running water or electricity, and no paved roads at all. She said it took a little under 2 days to walk on foot all the way to their sheep camp if they took a shortcut through a canyon. On the first day, the sun is beginning to hang low in the sky, and they decide to make camp. She explained that, back then, there were many hogans scattered across the res that didn't have permanent inhabitants. They were built with the same intentions as the reasoning behind hunters' cabins, to temporarily provide shelter for hunters, or in this case, sheep herders. She said that these hogans often had corrals for wary shepherds to house their sheep or livestock for the night and continue on their way the next day. Ranchers and locals would upkeep these safe houses sporadically. She remembers clearly being instructed by her mother which hogans were meant for that purpose, and the ones that had people die in them and were off limits, making them uninhabitable according to Navajo tradition. In place of a door, there was a tattered, moth-eaten blanket hanging from the doorframe. On the inside of the east-facing entrance was a plyboard, It was meant to be leaned up against the doorway and prevent wild animals from entering when occupied. Her older brothers gathered wood and started a fire. The smoke went up the stovepipe in the center of the hogan. She remembers everyone being fatigued and tired after a long day's march. The dirt floor provided a familiar and comforting smell. They laid their sleeping bags out. The plywood board was put up against the doorway. The brothers found long logs to leverage against the board. Staring at the smoke escaping through the smoke hole, she could see the stars and the dark night sky. The smoke hole was unusually eroded away, making it seem wider than typical smoke holes. The dirt pile on the ceiling of the hogan was probably eroded by wind and rain, not being maintained regularly, just packed down with fresh mud. The fire was just embers now. As she was drifting off to sleep, she said the sheepdogs that had accompanied them just started going crazy outside, howling and barking. She hears the thudding of a horse running around the hogan. She is startled by a loud thud up against the board at the entrance, but the brothers had braced the doorway correctly and it doesn't give out. And then she hears a thud on top of the hogan roof. Dust and debris begins falling from the old-fashioned hogan roofing under the weight of whatever was walking on top. Her older brother, who was closest to her, whispers in Navajo to close her eyes. She said curiosity got the best of her, and she kept them open. Rocks the size of gravel started falling down the stovepipe. The skinwalker was deliberately throwing heavy rocks down the stovepipe, making loud metal scraping noises as they fell into the hogan's fireplace. In the dark, her eyes dart from the low glowing embers of the fire upward, following the deep blackness of the stovepipe and out the smoke hole. There were no glowing eyes, as she would have expected, just the silhouette of the head and torso of the skinwalker peeking in. She described it as having ears on top of its head like a coyote or dog, but the ears weren't of the canine variety. The ears were elongated and pointy. In the darkness, she said they looked like donkey ears, but were positioned on a coyote-like head. She spent a few moments frozen and staring at the creature, never having seen anything that resembled it in nature. It was unaggressive and only watched them for a while, eventually dismounting from the roof, and the familiar thuds of horse hooves off into the distance. The dogs howled and whined after it, but they never left their post at the sheep corral.
This was this past May. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. The complex has no security guards whatsoever, with one other roommate. We'll call her Emily. It's also important to know that a lot of people will ask Emily if we are twins. We look very similar. She and I both spend almost every night at her boyfriend's house, and rarely are home. One night around 8:45 p.m., I was home cleaning before I left to go to my boyfriend's house. I ran to get something from my car and came back into my apartment. Locking the door behind me, 5 minutes after, I hear a knock at my door. I'm already a paranoid person, so I got a little scared. I knew it wasn't Emily because she would have called to tell me she forgot her key. I tried to ignore it. Then a second knock. These also weren't innocent knocks. They sounded like a cop knock. Immediately after the second knock, I faced down my boyfriend. He's convincing me to look through the peephole. I look and no one else is there. I say, okay, I'm gonna pack my stuff and come over. I ran and locked myself in the bathroom, crying until he got there to get me, and no one was at my door. The next day, my boyfriend and I stopped at my apartment, so I could change and get ready for a Cinco de Mayo gathering. Less than 8 people to stay social distance. No knocks that day. The day after I got home, Emily was getting kitty litter and was going to meet me at the apartment since we were both too scared to be there alone. I get home and was sitting on my phone scrolling through TikToks. About 10 minutes into the scroll, I hear the same knock. I look through the peephole and call Emily and describe to her what the guy looked like. She has no idea who it can be. I then watched him walk away and thought maybe he will stop. Another 5 minutes pass and he's back knocking. I FaceTime Emily again and she tells me to open the door. Don't ever do this. I opened the door and the guy was a bit muscular. Looked a little bit older than me. I'm 23. and was someone who I'd never seen around my apartment complex before. He seemed shocked that I answered the conversation. Him. "Oh, is this a bad time?" "Yes. I was just wondering. Do you have a printer?" "No." "Oh, okay." Slowly walks away. I also thought it was weird that someone was asking for a printer, being that all classes were moved to online format, and we're supposed to be in quarantine. And also, if you need a printer that bad, and someone doesn't answer the first knock, why would you keep trying? Especially when you don't know that person. We told a bunch of people about the knocking in our complex, and one other apartment said that they had the same issue. They were also 2 girls living alone. The next day, Emily went back with her boyfriend. As she was leaving the apartment, she heard from a balcony next to ours, "Yo, is that her?" She turned around and the 2 men ran back inside. We told the apartment complex and called the cops. They said they can't really do anything unless the guy is present at our door knocking. After this, we installed a motion detection camera and put a sign up on our window. "We have cameras. You're being recorded." Since then, Emily has moved out. I have 2 new male roommates who are seen coming in and out of the apartment, and no one has came and knocked. So, mystery knocking man, let's not meet again. This happened to a friend of mine who lived in the same neighborhood as me. When we were about 8 to 9 years old, my friend E and her family lived just a few houses down from the street from mine. We lived in a neighborhood where almost everyone knew each other. The biggest worry we ever had was that an outsider would come to the neighborhood and cause trouble. Some people left their homes unlocked because we felt that safe. There was an incredibly nice family that lived directly across the street from E's house. A mom, a dad, and a 16-year-old son. And their mentally challenged son, who was 22 years old. I'll call him Tim. Tim was always home because he wasn't employed due to his disability. But his parents were working full-time and his brother had school. All day, every day, he would be outside waving and smiling at anyone who drove or walked by. Big smiles, showing all of his teeth and sometimes giggling, just out of the pure excitement and happiness of interacting with other people, since he spent most of his time alone. He was not creepy. One day, E was sick and didn't go to school. Even though she was only about 8 or 9 years old, E was allowed to stay home sick by herself. Plus, her mom was going to be home around 2 anyways, since she was only working part-time, and the neighborhood was safe. E locked all the doors except for the one that led into the garage. They used this as their front door, because it was easier in those cookie-cutter homes to just open the garage, pull in and get out of the car, close the garage and walk into their house, through the unlocked door that led from the inside of the garage to the inside of their home. This is obviously not the safest way to protect your home from intruders, but we literally all did it, as if a flimsy garage door could keep anyone from getting into what they wanted. The worst part is that they had an outside cat, and kept the garage door cracked just enough for him to get inside for his food or shelter if he needed to. So, he's asleep, feeling sick, and with a fever. All the doors and windows are locked, except for the door that leads to the cracked garage door. Tim was bound to know she was home alone since he was outside the front of his house all the time. He wakes up to the pounding at the front door. Startled, she walks downstairs and looks through the peephole. It's Tim. She cracks the door and says something along the lines of how he notices everything, and would guard her home since she was home alone. She said thanks, but there was no need to, and to have a good day. It was beautiful weather, and he looked pissed. He got angry and said, "You think I can't do it because I'm dumb? But you watch and see me. I ain't dumb." She said sorry. She didn't mean it like that. But she had to rest now. She dozed off and woke up to a noise downstairs in the kitchen, the room the door from the garage led to. She hadn't heard the garage door open, but she was sick, so she just figured she was in a deep sleep and just hadn't noticed. completely disoriented from the time she looked over at the alarm clock. It was 10:20, way too early for Mom to be home. At that moment, she heard noises again downstairs. She didn't call out. She had been sleeping in her parents' bedroom and ran into their bathroom, slamming the door loudly. Then she remembered their bathroom door had no lock on it. The noise she made slamming the door alerted the intruder to where she was in the house, and big footsteps started coming upstairs. She moved quickly and quietly to her parents' closet, which was on the other side of the big room. She closed the doors and hid behind some clothes, all the time thinking how someone could have gotten inside. She remembered that the garage door was cracked for the cat, slightly, but not close enough for a thin person to slip underneath. Tim walks into the bedroom. Tim is tall and thin. She can see him through the slatted closet doors. She sees him holding a knife and did everything she could not to scream. He quickly went to the master bathroom where she was just moments before. These cookie-cutter houses only have about 3 floor plan layouts, so it wasn't hard for him to find. He looked inside the bathroom and didn't see her, then started making loud throaty noises, like someone would if they're frustrated and angry, while pacing the entire house. She stayed in the closet for hours, even after she heard him exit through the front door. She stayed until her mom got home. She was crying hysterically and told her mom what happened. Had she not been so upset and had one of the kitchen knives not been left on the front door, her mom might have blamed it on being delirious from a high fever because nobody would expect Tim to do that. The police were called and an official report filed. I'm not sure if he had any charges pressed against him, because after she told me the story once, she refused to talk about it again. I overheard her parents a few times talking about the situation to my own parents, but never heard what the consequences were. He was so traumatized that she went to therapy afterwards for several years, and still wouldn't talk to anyone about it because she didn't want to remember or relive the experience. We even moved into an apartment together years and years later for college purposes. She never talked about Tim. It was like he never existed, and I never asked. I noticed she always locked the front door, which you should, of course. Always locked the door that led to the patio/balcony, even though we were on the 7th level, and always locked her bedroom door, to which she added an additional lock. And when she locked all these doors and the windows, she always checked 3 times, every single time. I often wonder if there was more to the story that E told me. We were kids after all, and sometimes kids don't want to explain things that they don't understand. It is terrifying to think of what his intentions were, and if perhaps he did find E, and something else happened. As horrifying as the experience must have been for her, it made a huge statement in the neighborhood for everyone to be more careful. I will always make sure everything is locked. I don't want to ever meet you again, Tim. Okay, so I literally just found about the r/let's not meet subreddit, and thought it might be a good way for me to evacuate, since I still make nightmares about what happened. Also, forgive my bad English, I'm Belgian. My name is Jaiji, and I was 14 at the time. It happened 4 years ago. That day, my little brother Noah was sick and had already spent 3 days in bed. He had a high fever. No big deal, the only real trouble was that he was 6 at the time, and obviously got our entire attention during that week. So yeah, that day my parents went out to buy his medicine and left me home alone to take care of him. They also asked me to bring all my brother's toys inside, so they wouldn't get wet from the rain that was coming later that day. So I did what I was asked, and I took care of Noah. I also brought some of the toys that were laying outside. I was pretty tired that day and thought I could do the rest later. So I went inside and sat down on the couch to watch TV before I had to prepare my brother's lunch. I was zapping through the channels and wasn't really aware what was going on around me. About 10 minutes later, I heard 3 honking noises coming from the side of the street, and didn't really pay attention to it. It could have been neighbors or a car passing by. Then, I realized how late it was, and then I had to go to the kitchen and start making my brother's lunch. Noah was resting upstairs, by the way. So, I was at the kitchen cooking his meal. The thing was, my kitchen has a large window offering a view of the street, and I saw my neighbor a bit worried out of his car looking around. Once again, I didn't pay attention to it and was focused on the food. At a moment, I opened the fridge and had a weird feeling, like someone was there staring at me. I closed the fridge door, looked at the window, and yes, there was a person standing outside close to the window staring at me. Now, I don't know why, but I don't remember what the guy looked like. It was really weird. Anytime I try to figure it out, it's like there's something blocking me. It's crazy. So, anyways, there's a stranger standing outside staring at me. I wanted to scream for help, but it just wouldn't come. I felt like the only good thing was to take my brother and leave the house from our back door. A bit excessive, I know, but I was 14, and I imagined the guy would just break the window at any moment and come in. So, on my way to Noah's room, I noticed the guy following me very calmly through the window. Imagine my surprise when I found that the front door was a bit open. I certainly didn't close it correctly when I brought my toys back in. Because of that now, I have a habit to check it at least 3 times, if I lock the door for sure. When I saw the door, I understood I eventually got a few seconds to go upstairs, instead of closing it, because he was so close he would just get in before I reached it. So instead, I ran upstairs, rushed into my brother's room and closed the bedroom door. Noah was very weak and kind of upset because the noise I made downstairs. It can seem unimportant, but hearing him complain made me realize we just couldn't leave anymore. And while I was thinking, I heard someone coming upstairs, and I literally shit myself. In a desperate move, I opened the window, and fortunately just underneath it stood Noah's big-ass trampoline, the one with the nets around it. The only thing reasonable for me was to throw my brother onto it, and just hoping we wouldn't break our bones. Luckily, the first floor was something like 4 meters high. When we landed on the trampoline, I could hear the bedroom door open. Now, Noah says while getting off, he saw a face. Apparently it was someone with a beard, wide eyebrows, and a hoodie, with a great psycho smile. I didn't, but I do believe him. We got off and we started running down the street. While I was running, I heard a voice behind us screaming, "Gigi!" I turned around and was happy to see it was my neighbor, the one observing the street previously. That was waving at us to come inside his house. I was very confident at the idea to come inside his house, as we used to come over and play there with their kids, so we came in. He closed the door, and we waited in there for our parents to come back. While we were there with his wife and kids, he was waiting out there. Funny thing, he explained later that he saw everything, and he honked at the stalker because he was standing in the middle of the street, looking at the house. He also saw the guy walking into the house and a girl throwing her brother through the window. It was funny when he told it. So my parents came back and were ironically planning a good little evening. They even brought pizzas and a movie along with the medicine. So, imagine how stupid they looked with all of that when they saw the police car and us waiting with them. So we explained everything, and we later moved into another house. We were already looking for a new place to go way before that, but that's really what gave us the motivation to search for real. We don't know what happened, but when the cops came in, the back door was open, and there was no one in, which means he ran away. As I said, I still think about it sometimes, and there's no way I will ever know who the guy was. I also realized if I had done what I had asked, and had brought the trampoline back in the garage as I was supposed to, well, I probably wouldn't be here to tell that story. The only thing I regret is that now Noah is 10. We got rid of his old toys and that trampoline, which means we can't make that jumping thing if it happened again. So, anyways, creepy stalker guy, let's not meet. So, this happened about 13 years ago. I was 10 at the time, my brother was 8. We had just moved to a new town that year, and the Walmart here has this sweet arcade up near the service desk. So, every time my parents would bring us grocery shopping, they'd give us a few dollars and let us play in the arcade. The town had an incredibly low crime rate, and the arcade is at the front of the store, where dozens of people are checking out. So, what could possibly go wrong? My brother is playing the claw machine while I'm standing on the side of the machine, trying to help him angle the claw perfectly, above the stuffed animals he's trying to get. Suddenly, this random hillbilly walks up to the claw machine next to us, inserts a quarter and begins moving the claw around. But for most of this time, he's making eye contact with my brother, and smiling. Not even watching the game. He's not talking to us, just staring and smiling. He has long, thin brown and silver hair, pulled back in a loose ponytail at the base of his skull, a camo trucker hat, and long, scraggly beard. I remember vividly the way he smelled: stale beer, ashtray, and something that smelled like sweat yet sour dirt, or fungus. He tried making small talk with my brother and I, who were raised to be aware of strangers, but still be polite. Eventually we got bored of the game we were playing, and I asked my brother to follow me to a new game, on the opposite side of the arcade. A few seconds later, the man follows us, stationing himself once again at the claw machine next to us. At some point, an overweight lady walks in and says to the hillbilly, "What are you doing to these little kids?" and snickers at me. He replies, "I'm trying to win them some stuffed animals." She then begins playing the claw machine on the other side of us, so that my brother and I are sandwiched between these two strange hillbillies. His comment comes across as weird to me, because previously I thought that he was maybe trying to win something for his kids, but this entire time he'd just been following my brother and I from game to game, trying to win us a toy. This had been going on for maybe 20 minutes at this point. They followed us to several different machines and spent a lot of money. The games they were all playing were 25 cents per play. Each time my brother and I switched machines, they'd follow us. The hillbilly says to the lady, "I'm out of money, you got any?" She says, "Nah, I'm broke too." My brother says, "I have $1 still." Now, this is the part that really scared me. I remember listening to these two talk about some weird things with us, asking if I have a boyfriend, asking where we go to school and where our parents work, asking if we've ever done drugs, etc. But when my brother said he had $1, she responded with the most terrifying thing I've heard from them yet. The woman suddenly burst out, "Well, shit, then give it to him, boy." Her face was red. The tone in which she shouted was so ear-piercing, and the guy wrenching, that I could feel blood drain from my face. My brother looked like he was about to cry. He hands her the $1, and her face lightens up. She laughs it off, almost like she was trying to make it seem like she was joking, when she yelled at us. My father walks up a couple minutes later. As I turn to tell him that these people have spent close to $15 to win a toy for us, they leave hurriedly. But before he gets a good look at them, my dad is livid. He takes us up to the front desk and tells them what I told him. They make an announcement on the intercom to keep an eye out for these people, and to report to an employee if they see them. They then call the police. I don't actually remember this part, or much anything after my father arrives, but this is what he told me. They never did find the couple. The police reviewed security cameras, too blurred to make out any physical details, and told my parents that the couple left the store immediately after my father showed up, without any groceries. Every time I see a man or a woman in Walmart that looks as I remember them, I get anxiety and try to avoid them. So, to the hillbilly couple lurking in Walmart, I hope to never, ever meet you again. Hey, I'm new to Reddit and have been binge reading all the posts here from the past year. That made me remember some weird things that happened to me and my mom. Sorry about the English, it's not my native language, so a little context to help the story flow. My parents got divorced when I was 10. I'm a female, by the way. And my brother was 8. They had bought a house in a fairly big land and decided to split it. The house was demolished and my mom was building a new house to live with me and my brother. We lived in a very small city that is known for its safety. Fast forward to when I was 15. Now I'm 25, and the house still wasn't ready. Me and my brother and my mom lived in an apartment really close to where they were building the house, so we would check it from time to time. It was an evening when me and my mom were getting back from the market and decided to go check the house. As we're parking in front of the house, the car light shows a man trying to jump the fence to get in. I was really freaked out, but my mom stepped out of the car and shouted to the man, "What the hell do you think you're trying to do?" It was an old guy, maybe in his late 60s. He was really tall, wide, and skinny. He was starting to go bald, having hair just on the sides of his head. He just sent me really creepy vibes. He jumped out of the fence and looked kind of scared. He wasn't expecting someone to show up because nobody lived at the place yet. He said he lived in the apartment building next to the house, and he was trying to cut down a branch from a tree that was knocking on his window. So my mom said that he was trespassing, and if he wanted to do something in her house, he would have to contact her. She yelled at him to go away and never come back. We went home and never really talked about it. A few months later, my family finally moved into that house. It's a cute house with lots of trees and a space for my dog to run free. At the time, we had 3 dogs, 2 small ones and a border collie we had rescued. Every day we could hear a teenage female voice yelling at the apartment building next to our house. We figured out it was just some teenage drama, because we could hear her saying things every teenage said to their parents, like, "I don't want to live here," or "You don't get me at all." So we never really did anything about it. Some time passed and my best friend moved into an apartment in that building. She said she could hear the teen yelling at her father. Guess who the father was? Yes, the man that was trying to get inside of my yard. That freaked me out a little bit, but I didn't have any proof he was doing something to her. One evening I was eating some fruit in the front of my house when my dog and I heard someone scream, like a man and a woman were fighting. I looked around and figured out it was coming from the building next to my house. As I looked to the building, I saw a woman falling from the balcony, but couldn't see if anyone had pushed her. So I called an ambulance and they were really fast to get here, and took her to the hospital. At the same time, the police came and took the man that I couldn't get a good look at to see if it was the same man that trespassed here. I didn't get to know what happened that day, or who the man was. My dad started building his house next to my mom's. I spent a lot of time in my best friend's apartment. That was just by the creepy guy's apartment. As I said, my yard was filled with trees, and sometimes we could see animals there, like lizards, snakes, foxes, possums. This day, me and my friend were in her balcony, and could see a lizard walking in the wall that separated the house and the building. In the balcony next to hers, the creepy man showed up with a gun, trying to shoot that lizard. We started screaming for him, begging him not to kill the lizard. He looked at us surprised. I guess he thought he was alone. He said nothing, just went back in his apartment. I told my dad about it and he said I shouldn't interact with that man. I was already 18 and things started to calm down, or so I thought. It was an afternoon around 1600 and I was home alone. I decided to go for a walk with my border collie dog. She was really sweet, and I used to ride my bike as she followed me running, so I did that. As we were coming back to my house, just passing by the building, that man threw us a really big rock at my dog. She was running, so the rock hit her leg. I cursed at him and got back into my house, looking at my dog to see if she was hurt. I told my mom, and she said I should never walk alone. Some days later, I found a really cute but skinny cat at my college. I was sitting down smoking and this cat jumped into my lap. I came back to watch a class with him in my lap. He slept there for the whole class. I came back home with him. He was orange and fierce, as he was a street cat before. We let him go for walks in my street. Everyone liked him. He was really friendly and asked for everyone to pet him. People let him to their houses and frequently sent my mom pics of the cat on their yard or sofa. So we never thought that he was bothering someone by walking around. And at this time, we were forgetting about the violent nature of our neighbor. My family went on a trip to visit my grandpa, and my dad stayed to take care of our pets. He said one night he heard some footsteps around his house, but as he walked out the front door, he couldn't see anyone. He thought it was just the dogs messing around, and went back into his house to sleep. When we came back, we realized that one of the trees in my mom's house was dying. It was a really big tree. We think it's about 100 years old. This tree is the biggest one in the yard, and it was always so beautiful. I should mention that this is the tree that the man was complaining about the first time we met him. So my dad went to look at the tree and figured out that it had a lot of holes in it. He said it's a way to get poison inside of a tree to kill it. He also said we shouldn't tell my mom because it was going to scare her and make her really sad, because the trees were the main reason to buy that place. I never told her about it. Some time passed and me and my brother moved to another town to finish our studies. I wanted to take my cat with me, but my mom said it was going to be hard for him to adapt living in an apartment. He liked to go for walks, so I agreed that she should stay with him. A few days later, she visited me and said my cat had died. I was broken. How did it happen? She found him with his neck broken in front of the apartment building next to our house. His head was twisted, but my cat was still alive. But as she arrived to the vet, my cat was already dead. She said she thinks it was the man that killed him. We don't have any proof, but you know that feeling when you just know. I cried so much, and just writing about this makes me cry. He was my first cat, and he was so sweet. My mom still lives in the same house. She has 5 cats now, but none of them go out. The man still lives next to her. I'm with her during quarantine, and I see him all the time. He walks past our house, always looking up to see if someone's in there. I wish I could say, "Hey, creepy old guy, let's not meet." But unfortunately, I see him almost every day.
Back in 2013, I was teaching English in Shukugawa, Hyogo, Japan for a year. It was truly a dream come true. Well, my English center's last class got out at 22:30, and with it being Japan, I felt completely safe walking home along the Shukugawa River so late at night. Along my walk, I had to pass under the JR Kobe line and would pass a small Buddhist temple as I came out from under the bridge. Now, I had done this walk dozens of times by then, and nothing scary, let alone mildly unnerving, ever happened. It was late March, so the weather was cool and comfortable. However, I noticed that as I drew closer to the temple, it got cooler. Cool enough for me to zip up my hoodie and shiver. As I was coming up the path, I heard the distinct sound of someone praying at the altar. The small gong bell was rung, a 5-yen coin clattered in the altar box, and 2 claps to announce the prayer's presence to the gods. I stopped for a brief second, thinking it was weird someone was out so late to say a prayer, but I shrugged it off and moved on. Turning the corner, I expected to see someone at the altar, but it was empty. I froze. There was absolutely no way someone could have prayed so fast and bolted off without me hearing them along the gravel path. It was then I noticed how still the night was. No bugs or birds, no sounds of the city, and the river to my left sounded muted. The feeling of being watched and unwelcomed washed over me. Slowly I began to move, the temple now to my back. I took just a few steps before I heard the bell, the coin, and 2 claps. Fear gripped me. I broke out into a cold sweat as the shadows of the trees seemed to grow dark and deep. I gathered my nerve and anxiously turned to face the temple. Nothing but a vacant temple. Slowly I turned and started walking again. Then suddenly, I heard 2 clear-as-day claps in my left ear. Needless to say, I bolted the rest of the way home. After that night, I avoided passing by that temple whenever I worked the later classes, and opted to just take the long way home. This happened to me when I was in college. Probably one of the creepiest and weirdest things to ever happen to me. I believe in ghosts. I have had countless experiences in my life that have made it almost impossible for me not to. This still gives me chills whenever I think about it. I was a freshman in college and was heavily involved in the arts, theater and music specifically. The fine arts building of my college had quite a bit of history. It was built in 1916 and had previously been one of the largest Masonic temples in the city. This is fairly evident by the Masonic symbols adorning the building and covering the stained glass windows. I had heard rumors of secret passageways under the building that ran all the way into downtown, but I will say I didn't believe them. A few of my professors had told stories of seeing shadow people or feeling like they were being watched when they knew they were alone, but I thought they were just messing with us freshmen. I spent most of my time in the costume shop. I should note, the costume shop was on the sub-ground floor, technically the basement. It was down 2 flights of stairs from the main entrance that led you to a landing with the costume shop and another door that I just assumed was a utility closet, because it was always locked. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was just something off about it to me. On this particular evening, I had finished rehearsal for a play around 6 p.m. and figured I would do a bit of cleaning in the costume shop while I waited for my roommate to meet me so we could go grab some dinner. I was inside the costume shop when I heard a knock at the door. I walked over and looked out the small window to the right side of the door, expecting to see my roommate, but there was no one. I opened the door and stepped out looking around. I looked down the hallway to the left of the door to see if my roommate was hiding, trying to freak me out. Nothing. I shrugged it off as me being tired and went back into the shop and shut the door behind me. I went about my business for a bit until I heard another knock at the door a few minutes later. I was more hesitant this time. I walked to the door and again looked out the small window. Still, there was no one outside. I tried to open the door, and while the handle turned, the door wouldn't budge. I pulled harder thinking maybe the door was stuck, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone was holding the door shut. I looked out the window again and still didn't see anyone. I was now frantically pulling on the handle, feeling the fear rising in my chest. I let go of the handle, only to have it start shaking wildly. Suddenly it stopped. Everything was quiet with the exception of my own shaky breath. Then from outside the door, I heard the sound of a door creaking open. I gathered my strength and tried the door. It opened and I cautiously walked onto the landing. The always locked door was ajar. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" I tried not to sound freaked out, but I was absolutely terrified. I pulled open the door and was greeted by a pitch black staircase leading down. It smelled like a tomb that had just been unsealed after 100 years, musty and ancient. I felt the wall for a light switch but couldn't find one. I reached into my pocket for my cell phone and turned the screen on. It was bright enough that I could sort of see as I made my way down the stairs. The walls were brick and the stairs were made of stone. The closer I got to the bottom, the colder it became. I was on the second to last step, straining to see what was in front of me. It was a door, a large stone door. I was about to move to the last step when I heard it. A voice. It was deep and sounded like it was right in front of me. It said only one word: "Welcome." I couldn't even scream. Instead, I ran up the stairs, tripping at one point and skinning my knee and shin. Once I reached the top, I slammed the door shut and ran out of the building. My roommate showed up 5 minutes later to find me standing on the sidewalk, shaking. After I told her what had happened, she went inside to get my things and locked the costume shop door. When she came out, she looked at me with a worried expression. "That door was wide open when I went to get your stuff. Are you sure you closed it?" I just nodded my head. We walked home and didn't really talk more about it. I didn't go back into the building until the end of the next week. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. When I finally did, I descended the stairs and felt a chill shoot through my body. I looked at the wall where the door had been, and there was nothing there. It was just a wall. I thought I was losing my mind. I walked to the wall and studied it. My drama teacher happened to be walking by and I stopped him. "Wasn't there a door here?" He chuckled. "Yeah, they walled it up last week." Did it in a hurry too, not entirely sure why though. I always thought it was a closet or something. I can't say what I encountered that night. Was it the spirit of a Freemason who never left their temple? Was it something more sinister? I honestly don't know. I spent a lot of time in that building over the course of my 2 years at that college, and while I had other odd experiences, they were nothing compared to what I experienced that one awful night. When I was about 7, my aunt gave both me and my sister really nice dolls. They were like infant-sized. My sister's doll had blonde curly hair tied up, blue eyes, and a white dress with different colored hearts. Well, she was scared of it. I think dolls just freaked her out in general. So my grandma kept it, and for some reason hung it on her wall. I've always wondered why she did that. I never got to ask her, so if anyone knows, why do some people do that? She really just hung the doll by the dress with a nail above her bed. I just thought it was something to do with a Mexican superstition. It wasn't like she had a ton of dolls everywhere either, it was just this one doll. Well, we all had to sleep with it just hanging there because it was a one-bedroom house. Then within a couple of days, we all started having nightmares about the doll trying to kill or harm us. My sister and I slept on the floor, and she woke me up and said the doll was calling my name. Not hers, mine. I told her to shut up because I thought she was trying to scare me. Then she started crying and said, "No, I'm serious, please." I drowned her out and fell back asleep. I had a dream that I was alone in my school cafeteria and a little girl was singing the ABCs, and I just knew it was under the vending machine. I walked to it, and then my ankle got sliced when I got to the vending machine. I fell and couldn't walk. Our cafeteria had a stage, and I looked up, and she, the doll, was peeking her head through the curtain laughing at me. Then I woke up. Another day, I overheard my mom and aunt talking about their dreams they had of the doll, and they all included just them and me. Like, I was the only one, including themselves, that was in the dream. My mom said she and I were running from the house, that we both jumped in the car and she saw the shadow of the doll next to the car window, that I kept telling her to let the doll in, and she wouldn't, so I started biting her. Then my aunt said the doll and I were sitting on the couch and I was acting and dressed weird. She said I was dressed like in old-time little girl's clothes and that when I talked, she never saw my mouth move, but the doll was talking in my voice. She had a bad vibe, and once we realized that she felt a bad vibe, we attacked her. As for my grandma, she refused to take the doll down. I kept having nightmares of the doll, and so did everyone else. Then finally, like anyone else would do, I took the doll and took its eyes out because I thought if she couldn't see us anymore, it would stop. I put the doll back up and my family was horrified. I did not want an ass whooping, so of course, I didn't come forward and say it was me. My family was sure the doll was cursed and blessed the house. The doll was gone the next trash day. For a week straight, my grandma prayed to us in Spanish and threw holy water the moment you walked through the door. Then one day, me and my sister were playing. She's like, "You have to be happy now because Grandma's doll wanted you sad." And all I told her was to shut up. I'm half Navajo. For years of my life, I lived on the Navajo Nation Reservation in a small town called Shiprock in New Mexico. My Native American side of my family always warned us to be careful at night. My grandparents would always tell me stories of these shape-shifting witches who can curse you, kill you, or mess with you. They called them skinwalkers because they could take the skin of dead animals and wear them to change into that animal, or something in between a human and animal, not a werewolf. I never believed in it really. I'm only half Navajo and light-skinned, so I was never treated the same by most people here. So I drifted away from the culture and thought it wasn't for me. If you're a skeptic, that's fine. I was also until I came face to face with things I can't explain. It was around summer. This happens when I was in high school, so about 6 to possibly 8 years ago. I would have been like 15 or 17 then. I used to hang out with a group of guys who like to do a lot of delinquent type stuff. You know, smoke cigarettes, stay up all night with the guys, and playing video games at somebody's house. Then at 3 in the morning, if we felt like it, we would go sneak out to Paradise. I know, it's ironic, the name. It's basically a giant metal pipe that carries irrigation water to all the farms, but really, it was also a spot for kids to drink or get high in the evenings. However, the place did have a scary history of kids and adults who drowned or died in the night. I always thought those were urban legends, though. At 3 a.m., that was our time we as boys would test one another to cross this pipe. Sort of an initiation, see how far we could go. We usually could go all the way across. Now, keep in mind that pipe goes well over 3 stories high. It's also wide. I'd say as wide as an average car. And we would walk this thing for kicks in a group of 9 at 3 in the morning. So one night, me and a small group of friends were driving around bored at 2 a.m. wanting to spook each other. So I said, let's go to Paradise and walk the pipe, as most of these friends I was hanging out with had never done anything like that before. They agreed, pumped up on energy drinks, and we drove. It was pretty quiet, the sky was dark, and the night was cold. The boys with me were Michael, Cordy, Tommy, and Theral. Now, Theral was the driver because he had the car, and his family was pretty well off too, so he never had to worry about cash. We got to the place and he didn't want to go. Said his parents were traditional, and he just wanted to chill in the car. Basically, he wanted to text some chick, I'm sure, without us bugging him. I told him it's fine, keep the car locked and running in case we see something scary. Then me and the other boys went on without him. I remember we noticed a sheep or goat skin placed flat off to the right, just as we were starting to get on the pipe. We all noticed it looked strange, and I remember someone commenting it looked like a ritual sacrifice. Michael said something about a pentagram, but I wasn't sure if he was just joking or serious, but I thought they were just trying to scare each other. As we got onto the pipe, a few of the guys were scared and had me take the lead. As we crawled, I'd say a quarter of the way onto the pipe, talking and laughing. I noticed a faint whitish or light gray bat, bigger than my head, flying around us. It dived for us a few times and we dodged it. But then Tommy slipped because of his Converses and almost fell off of the pipe. I reached out to him, grabbing his right arm. Michael had grabbed my shirt collar and Cordy had grabbed him. All together we got back on the pipe and were shaking that we almost lost Tommy into the dark depths below. Suddenly the bat was gone. We were all freaking out, but the guys wanted to continue. We laughed about it as guys usually do, thinking that was weird. We passed the halfway point on the pipe with no problems, but as we got 3/4 of the way across, Michael saw something. You see, at the end of the pipe there is a hill, and behind that hill is very brightly lit because of a church somewhere off in the distance. Anyways, on that hill, there was a black figure of pointy ears, a dog silhouette. Now, Michael is a tough guy. He yelled at the thing, saying, "I'm not scared of you, you damn skinwalker," then tossed a few rocks he had in his pocket. One rock hit the pipe, the others fell into the brush below. That shadow silhouette dog stood up on 2 legs like a person. We all freaked out. Jaws dropped, then Cordy said, "Look, another one to the left." Tommy said there's another one on the right. So 3 silhouettes of pointy dog-eared people on the hill. I told them to back up so we can get to the car. The things to the right and the left of the hill started to move down the hill towards us. Now there's just one standing guard on that hill, the one who first stood up. Now we're trying to go back, but we're still 3/4 of the way on the pipe, and under us is complete darkness. It was quiet for a few minutes. Then we started to hear a girl crying. It sounded like she was hurt and scared, almost in pain. We were overcome with a strange feeling of wanting to help. Michael wanted to go back towards the end and crawl down and help this girl. I almost followed too. Inside, I was like, no, this is wrong. Something isn't right. So I yelled at him and everyone, saying, "Are you all stupid? Look at that thing up there on the hill. Did you not see those things? It's a trap. Screw that fake crying. If that girl's hurt, we'll come back when the sun's up in 2 hours and check." Now, the moment I said this, the crying stopped. All the guys freaked out, saying they can't believe what came over them. They said they'd almost forgot what we saw before. Halfway on the pipe now, and we hear a native drum being played like a powwow. We start running on this pipe. A third of the way almost to the car, Corey stops us. We can all hear it under our feet, sounding like a pack of snarling, growling, yelping coyotes. But it's pitch dark below, but we know they are under us. We run full speed, not looking back until we hit the car. We yell drive and haul ass on that dirt road back to a well-lit gas station and explain what happened to Theral. We couldn't get the girls crying out of our head, and we went back in the daylight just to make sure. We didn't find a girl. Instead, in the area, we listened to a different kind of crying. The sound was a whimper. Then out of the brush, we saw a coyote watching us. It was so close and unafraid of us. It wasn't even shy. I yelled, "You see that? That's the girl that was crying. She probably transformed. It's one of them." I then asked the coyote, "You're a skinwalker, aren't you?" It just looked at us for 4 seconds, dead in the eye, totally calm, and walked into the brush. We all agreed how unnatural that was for a coyote. We did not go back there after that. I'm not really a believer in the supernatural, but I've had 2 or 3 unexplainable experiences that give me goosebumps to this day. One of those experiences happened to me and my family back in 2009 when I was in high school. A few weeks prior to this, my whole family and I had gone through an extremely traumatic experience where we were tied up and robbed at gunpoint by 5 men in our home here in Johannesburg, South Africa. It was a fairly big house and we each had our own rooms, but my 2 sisters and I decided to put our mattresses together in the living room and sleep there till the end of the month before moving to our new home where we felt safer. All of us were already terrified being in that house, and what we heard that night just sent us over the edge. We all went to sleep around 8 p.m. and our little dog snuggled in amongst us. At the entrance to the living room in this house, there was this strange black glass mirror wall that was about 1 meter wide and 2 meters tall. This glass always freaked us out because it seemed to have no purpose. You couldn't really see your reflection too well in it as it was really dark, and our dog often barked at it for no reason. At this point, we didn't care about the glass wall, and we were more scared of real intruders, so we put our silly fears aside and set up our sleeping area right in front of it. We were all sleeping soundly at around 3 a.m. All of us woke up at the same time to the sound of what I can only describe as being a painful, long, ominous moan. It started out like a low whimper, and went on for a few seconds before increasing in volume and ending in a scream. It lasted for what felt like 10 seconds, and we all woke up right at the beginning and sat up. The sound felt like it was coming from right in front of us, and our dog went crazy before cowering as if someone was there. I grabbed my sister's hand, and as soon as the sound stopped, my eldest sister jumped up and smashed on the light. Our dog just stared at the mirror with his hair standing up straight as nails. We immediately went to the opposite side of the house and woke up my parents, who were baffled by what we told them. To this day, I think about that moan and how painful and depressing it sounded. There was no way I was just hearing things because we all woke up and heard it together. My sisters were way older than me, and they always tried to discredit anything paranormal, but that incident spooked them and made them think otherwise. I like to think that the culmination of all the bad energy, fear, anxiety, and trauma we had experienced during the robbery conjured up something that was an incarnation of sadness and despair. I heard its voice that night.
I have a story of something that terrified me as a young kid, and until today, I hadn't told anyone. When I was a kid, around 7 or 8, I picked up the habit of getting on the phone and listening in on phone calls of other people. My parents had just got one of those new cordless phones, and my sister and I were allowed to each have one in our rooms. I would occasionally listen to my sister's calls of gossip or my mom talking to her friends. Normally, I would pick up right after the call was answered and would immediately mute the phone. Most of the time, I became bored and would get right back to playing Nintendo 64. It was the excitement of no one knowing I was there that made it fun, at least until the night that I felt someone knew I was there, and that's when I stopped doing it. It was a weeknight during the summer, around midnight. I hadn't been able to sleep, so I was quietly playing video games in the dark with the sound off. The phone rang, and I immediately got excited. Who would be calling this late, and for what reason? I waited till the ringer stopped, and I immediately picked up the phone and muted it. I heard my dad saying, No, I think you have the wrong number." The guy responds, "Nah man, let me talk to Chris." My dad kept insisting, "You have the wrong number. No one lives here by that name. Please do not call back." My dad hangs up the phone, but I stay on. I then hear loud breathing for a couple seconds, followed by him saying, "I'm gonna kill you." I'm gonna fucking kill you. Then hung up. It's like he sensed that someone was still listening on the line. I never understood why originally normal sounding guy who was looking to talk to a friend would oddly say that on the phone and in that tone of voice. That night I didn't sleep, and I quickly turned off the TV so that it wouldn't shine through the window and draw attention. After this, I no longer picked up the phone to listen in. So creepy guy who called and told me that he was going to kill me, let's never meet. Well, this isn't nearly as creepy as other stories on here, but it still freaks me out to this day. A little background, this happened my freshman year in high school, so about 4 or 5 years ago. I don't want to say that I wasn't well liked, but I guess you could say I pretty much flew under the radar. Hell, hardly anyone knew my actual name. It pretty much goes without saying that I hardly had any friends, so it couldn't have been one of them trying to play a prank on me. Anyway, it was probably around midnight when my phone started to ring. It was from a blocked number, which is creepy in its own right, so I let it ring and go to voicemail. I didn't expect the caller to leave a message, seeing that blocked and unknown callers usually don't, so I was pretty apprehensive to listening to it. Curiosity got the best of me, however, so I decided to go for it. I figured there was no harm in it. It was probably a wrong number, right? The instant I heard the voice, I felt a sense of fear that was entirely foreign to me. It was a male voice, a deep, gravelly voice that was seething with rage. It also seemed familiar, as if maybe I went to school with this person, but I couldn't place my finger on it. The voice not only addressed me by name, but also told me that they knew where I lived. They called me a snitch, telling me that I had gotten them expelled and that snitches die. They threatened to come in my backyard while I was asleep and kill my dog, and then kill me. I thought about telling my parents about it, but I didn't want to anger whoever had called me. I never got another call like that again, and nothing ever happened. But damn, that scared the shit out of me. For some background information, about 2 years ago, I had to go to a psychiatric facility so that I could deal with my depression issues. At this time, I was a 14-year-old girl. I was in the hospital for 3 days when all of this started. The third day I was there, I woke up with an awful stomach ache. I convinced the nurses to let me stay and from activities and sleep off the pain. So, I'm alone in the hospital, plus the staff, when the patient phone starts ringing. I run over to answer it, thinking it was my boyfriend calling, but instead, it's a man's voice that I didn't recognize. Can I talk to Sandra? I was the only patient there, so I said she wasn't here. Alright, thanks. Who is this? The voice sounded a lot like my friend's dad, who I had just met the night before during visiting hours. I told him my name, figuring he would recognize it. What you in for? I told him it was personal. This started to raise some red flags for me, because I told my friend's dad why I was in there the night before. Did you fight to get in here? Like, beat up any other girls? I said no, and I was quickly becoming creeped out. It took a few more personal questions for me to realize that there's no Sandra at the hospital. I wasn't sure on everyone's names, but I definitely hadn't heard Sandra before. I really started becoming uncomfortable, and I told him I had to go, and that was that. Visiting hours come around, and there's a phone call for me. A man asked for me, saying it was my dad, but my dad was sitting right next to me. I explained that he had called earlier, and my dad was pissed. He went over to the phone and demanded to know who was calling. The man didn't say anything and hung up. After a couple more calls for me by name, I told the hospital staff. They became very concerned and we weren't allowed to answer the phones for a while. Apparently, a convicted rapist has been calling the mental hospitals for years now, getting the names of the girls who answer the phone. He then uses whatever information he learns from the girls and calls back continuously, posing as their dad's or boyfriend. Apparently, he tried to pick up patients a couple times. The weirdest part is, when you call the hospital, you have to know the birth date of the person that you're trying to reach, or the staff won't put the call through. So, he somehow knew a bunch of crazy teenage girls' info, and used it to prey on us when we least expected it. It definitely freaked me the fuck out, seeing as he should have been the one in the hospital. Several years ago, I was off school for summer break. I was about 16 at the time. My younger siblings were both at sleepaway camp. My parents both worked full time, and most of my friends were away. I ended up spending about a month alone at the house. Our phone system has always been a bit strange, since one of the phones has never worked. I didn't realize it, but my dad had replaced the faulty phone. I spent my time eating and reading, lazing around the house. I started to notice something a bit strange happening with the phones. The phone would ring, and I would pick up. Shortly after, the person on the other end would hang up. I didn't think anything of it, attributing it to strange phone system. Sometimes I would forget to pick up the phone, and it would go straight to machine, which I would be able to hear, and there was never a message left. I didn't particularly find it odd because there were a good deal of normal calls as well. Now, one weekend, I ignored one or two calls. I was too lazy to get up and pick the phone up. I heard the machine answer, and no message was left. I assumed that if it was important, the person would have left a message. I was in my room reading and listening to music when I heard a creaking of the front door. I got up out of my room and walked out the long hallway towards the front door. I assumed the wind blew it open, but it was a sunny, beautiful day and there's barely a breeze. Suddenly I froze. I heard the creaking of the floorboards, the wood in front of the door. Both parents were at work and no one should be coming over. I mustered up the energy and shouted out, "Hello?" I listened intently, waiting for a few minutes, and peeked around the hallway. No one was there, but the front door was wide open. I hurried over and slammed it shut. A few hours later, my parents came home. I explained the front door, trying to justify it, telling them that it must have been my mind playing tricks on me. They responded by saying I should really be careful because there has been robberies in the neighborhood in the last few weeks during the day when the robbers had checked that no one was home. I asked how they confirmed that no one was home, and what my mom said still chills me. They simply call the houses to see if anyone would pick up. This story takes place in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. At the time, I was still in college, but my hometown was just a short drive away, so I ended up working at my local library. This part is relevant because I believe the subject of the story obtained my info through these means. I've had a number of creepy encounters with people, mostly men, throughout my life. I'm a straight male, but my short stature and boyish looks tend to attract a certain subset of creeps, though not as much as women have to suffer. I can at least say I understand the psychological terror it can instill. The library seemed like an epicenter for creeps. Like this creepy dude who wanted to paint me in private, which is in itself another story for another day. So one morning during summer of that year, after a pretty heavy night of drinking with some friends, I get a call from an unknown number. It's the 2000s, so I wasn't one to ignore calls at that time. And it was coming in a ridiculous early time, so I worried it was something serious. Well, on the other end was this guy that sounded like he lacked confidence. You could hear the quivering in his voice. He asked if he could speak to, let's say, Charles. It was concerning some kind of business proposal. I told him he got the wrong number, but he kept on insisting that it was okay and he would talk to me instead. Since this happened so long ago, and I was certainly hungover, I can't remember the details of what came next, except it was very persistent, somewhat nonsensical, and very annoying, so I hung up after a little bit. A week or two would go by without incident, but one early morning, and another hangover one at that, another call from a different unknown number, same MO, asking for someone I didn't know about a deal or a home being sold. Whatever he could come up with. Again, I told him he got the wrong number, and this time promptly hung up on him after he went through his spiel that it was okay and he could talk to me instead. This started happening more frequently, seemingly at random, since he wasn't consistent with what day he would call, but it was always super early. I still don't know why I continued to pick up an unknown number, but even with the unsettling nature of the calls, I still wasn't 100% creeped out. Until one morning when I got another call. Same setup, except after I once again told him that he got the wrong number and I didn't want to hear about another proposal or what. He said in a rather creepy whisper, "I want to see your nether regions." I told him if he didn't stop, I was going to call the cops. I heard him stutter, and then he hung up himself. Never heard from him again. Now, the reason why I think the library is relevant here is because the place is mostly run by elderly women. They were as sweet as can be, and I loved working for them, but they had a habit of trusting random weirdos with personal information about their staff. The creep who wanted to paint me, for example, learned my full name and what I was studying in school simply by asking one of them when they were stationed at my desk. I know it doesn't seem totally weird, but I felt like it was a breach of privacy. Especially after that same creep, knowing that I was immediately uncomfortable in his presence, began to come in and linger around me when I would be stationed at the checkout counter, including leaning in real close and breathing heavily onto me. Gross stuff like that. I wouldn't be surprised if the phone creep got my info the same way. If he and the painter weren't one and the same. So creepy morning phone call guy, let's not meet, and I'm very glad that we never have. This happened yesterday, and before anyone says this, yes, I know I'm stupid. I had just gotten home from work around 9 p.m. and I barely had time to take off my shoes when I get a phone call from some number I didn't recognize. I'm searching for new jobs, and I thought it might be one of those places that I was applying to, calling me back. I pick up the phone, and it's some guy who says he's with some kind of third-party detention center, which, as he explained, was for low-risk inmates, and were sent there when the local jails were busy or filled. That should have set off a nice red flag for me, but for whatever reason, it just made sense in my tired brain. I was getting ready to tell this guy that I wasn't interested in making a donation or anything like that, when he says, "This is," insert my full name. I confirm, and he says that they're holding my boyfriend at this center, saying my boyfriend's full name and giving me a dead description of him. I said, "What's going on, since my boyfriend is supposed to be at work right now?" And the guy on the other end provides an explanation. He says my boyfriend had struck a pregnant woman with his car on his way to work and was 4 times the legal limit for blood alcohol. He said the woman was in critical condition and my boyfriend had a few broken ribs and broke his nose in the accident. I'm freaking out at this point and asked if I could speak to my boyfriend, which the man obliged. I was put on hold for a minute before my boyfriend picks up the line. This person on the other line was panicking, saying how it wasn't his fault and begged me not to tell his parents, again using my name. It didn't particularly sound like my boyfriend, but I figured it was because of his broken nose he supposedly had, and his tone really helped sell it because it sounded so legitimate. The man from before comes back on the line before I can ask any questions and explains that they had to sedate my boyfriend since he began to panic and hyperventilate, which I was starting to relate to more and more by the second. The man on the other end tells me that I should come right away and that bail was set for $2,000, cash only. I stupidly tell him that I don't have that much and that maybe I have half of that. He tells me that it's fine and that I could work something out with the front office once I got there, and to just bring what I have, seemingly like he's trying to calm me down. He's giving me the address, and I could barely hold a pen because my hands were shaking so badly, and I'm very poorly trying to hold back tears. All of a sudden the door opens and my boyfriend walks in, completely looking normal, with no broken nose, but more than a little confused as to why I was crying. I'm still on the phone with a man and ask him what the fuck he thinks he's doing, telling him how my boyfriend just walked in, and the guy promptly hangs up. I tried calling back a few times, but it went directly to voicemail. I find out the power to the bar my boyfriend works at had gone out, so his boss sent him home early, and I've never been so grateful for a power outage. My boyfriend slept on the couch to keep watch, but unfortunately I still couldn't sleep at night, so I decided to look up the name of the organization the man said he worked for. Big surprise, that turned up nothing. I then looked up the address he had given me on Google Maps and see that it's some random abandoned strip mall in the middle of a sketchy area that was about an hour and a half out of town. What really freaked me out about this whole thing was, the guy knew my number, both me and my boyfriend's names, but it didn't sound like anyone I met before. I have no idea what would have been waiting for me there, but I'm counting my lucky stars right now. So to the guy who wanted to meet me for God knows what at a sketchy ass strip mall, let's not meet. This is my first post here, and I'd like to share something that happened to me when I was a kid. I was around 7 years old and very close to my aunt and uncle that lived a few towns over. We had a house phone, and I was allowed to make calls to people that were in the address book. I would call them once a week just to know how they were doing and ask silly questions like, how was your day, how are your dogs, or when are you coming to visit. One day, I accidentally pressed the wrong number while dialing and called someone else. A lady answered the phone, and I started talking as if I was talking to my aunt. I guess as a kid, I didn't find much different in females' voices. I asked her how she was. She said she was okay, but asked what my name was because apparently my number appeared as unknown. I told her, Tia, this is Pineapple Yard. I'm using Mom's phone. Her voice changed, and she started talking to me like she knew me. Asked me questions about school, which I found odd because she knew I was homeschooled, which I corrected her and reminded her that I was homeschooled. This went for 3 days. Around the same time of day, she would call. I would run to the phone and answer. We would talk for around a half an hour. My mom would only allow me to make calls for less than 10 minutes because it was expensive. So I told my aunt to call back when she wanted to talk because we couldn't pay the calls. We got close, talking about her day, how she was a teacher. I told her about stuff I liked and never felt closer to her. Then one day, she asked me for my address. She said she had forgotten where I lived and wanted to take a visit. And that was a big red flag for me, as my uncle and aunt knew exactly where I lived. I got a bit scared and hung up. I started overthinking about weird stuff she had said to me, like if I had a boyfriend, or what was my favorite place to visit. Questions my aunt probably would not ask. Next time she called, I told her that she wasn't my Tia and that we couldn't keep talking anymore, which she responded saying, "You're too friendly. It's sad we can't be friends anymore, but I know where to find you. We will see each other soon." And then hung up. I got scared. I went looking for my mom and told her I called the wrong number and that I hoped she didn't ground me. She checked the number in the caller ID and then the address book. The phone number was different from my aunt's by one number. It was a private phone, so it didn't appear in the big regional phone book. She called back, but no one picked up. I never told my mom what happened, just that I called the wrong number once, which was true. So creepy lady from my childhood, let's not meet, ever. Good friends of mine and I went to college together and stayed in the same dorms. It wasn't uncommon for dorm phones to ring from drunk dialers or just plain misdials. The dorm phone number was very similar, and generally the person in the room would change from year to year. This particular friend of mine is athletic and is very good at the cold shoulder, so for the most part has never had any issues with creepers. She picks up the phone one night at 3 a.m. and there's a man on the other side of the phone. He identified himself by first name very readily. I think it was Joe. He asked for some other girl's name, and she informed him rather sleepily that he had the wrong number and no such girl lived there. He asked what her name is, and she gives it. He asks her the standard, "So what are you wearing?" She informs him, flannel PJs, and bids him a good night, thinking that was the end of it. The next night, again about 3 a.m., the phone rings and he asks for her by name. She informs him that she's not interested in speaking with him and not to call again. However, he didn't stop. He keeps calling her night after night. This is particularly worrisome because the dorm phone numbers are formatted such that you have a good idea where the room is by the number, and vice versa. She spoke with a friend in the family who is a cop who agrees to chase a unit on the phone. Her relationship with her roommate isn't above cordial, so the roommate doesn't understand that the trace item needs to stay plugged in because this is a legitimate issue. Fast forward to winter break. She is spending time in my room but needs to go grab something in her room. While in her room, for just those brief minutes, the phone rings. The call trace unit isn't plugged in. She is afraid that he's calling because he could see her room light from the street. At the time, I noticed a man walking through the hallway. Since that night, I've never known if that was someone caring for the dorms, doing a round, or if it was a creeper. Fortunately though, my friend no longer picks up that phone. She's still spooked by men who sound like Joe, and has never felt quite as safe as before.